Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, in my previous video I have given you an understanding of how the framework of cognitive behavior therapy in terms of how the situation that you see affects the thoughts, emotion, bodily sensation and behavior. So this whole system is yourself. So this situation can be a negative situation where you face all kind of problems, where you have automatic negative thoughts which affect your emotion in terms of your stress, and the situation where you have this idea that you are going to die, or you're going to have an accident, or you have the feelings, okay, and the body sensation is reflected, and your behavior is either evasive, or you go into withdrawal, or you go into other symptom in terms of whatever that you are facing. So this is a CBT model that you see in terms of how your thoughts affects your body sensation, your emotions affects your behavior, and how they form a circle. All right, and this is all based on you. This is you. That means no external sources whatsoever. So as I mentioned to you, these automatic thoughts just popped up. All right, so Beck says that he has no idea where this come from, but it just popped up. So you have all kind of popped up automatic thoughts 50 to 70,000 times a day, which is a lot, and a lot of them are repetitive, a lot of them are negative, depending on how your situation in life, in terms of your input from the environmental sources, input from the intra and interpersonal sources, and for us, input from your inner speech. So this inner speech also has a very powerful way of modulating your negative thoughts. And this is the beautiful thing about PICBT, Positive Islamic Cognitive Behavior Therapy, because we believe that the sources of our thoughts not only come from within, but without. That means it comes from outside. So we say that beyond ourselves, there is another realm which affecting our heart, our intuitive heart. This is what we call the PICBT framework. Start with the realm of the intuitive heart. But below that, there will be many more realms, layers of realms in which we can discuss. And that can be an academic exercise, but that can be a basis of many research that is being done. Because from the realm of the intuitive heart, you can go back to the realm of consciousness. What is it? And if from consciousness, you can go into another realm of universal consciousness. If you discuss about the realm of the universal consciousness, what about the realm of the absolute, the realm of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. So those are the things that has been discussed. Remember, in the Muslim world, these issues has been discussed by our philosophers, our psychologists, our ulama and scholars. So they have debated this over and over again, and you can see the resources that we see this that's embodied in the body of knowledge within Islam. That is so fantastic. So this nature of the intuitive heart is mentioned because Allah Ta'ala tells us about reflecting and the use of the heart many times in the Quran, where Allah tells us about the use of our heart. It is not their eyes that is blind, that their heart is blind. So Allah is not talking about blindness. Blindness of what? You can only be blind in the eyes, but Allah tells about blindness of the heart. So this is the intuitive heart that's external. So if you look from the Positive Islamic Cognitive Behavior Therapy, this is the external, this is you and your situation. First that comes from you, from the intuitive heart, will be the feelings, F. Then it comes the emotion, E. And then it comes the thought. So FET. So we have the FET mode. Whereas for cognitive behavior therapy, you have your thoughts, emotion, and feelings mode. So TEF. So we are a reverse process. We are taking the sources of thoughts and automatic speech away from just internal, but to the external sources, in which we have a way of explaining it scientifically. Remember, this is science, and I'm going to prove to you some of the hundreds of research that's being done now. I'm just going to play one or two videos for you to see the beautiful ideas of this intuitive heart that's now being accepted in mainstream psychology. That's why now they're talking about mindfulness. Where the mindfulness come from? From the mind? No, they are talking about the intuitive mind. They're talking about the universal consciousness, from the conscious world, unconscious world, and so many of the variation that they have. But we have a beautiful truth that is embodied in Islam, and I can show you to you just a short video here to show how this is being played out, so that inshallah you have a better idea, and then we can discuss this as we go on.
The human body is magnetic in nature, and what we know is that every organ in our body creates an electrical field and a magnetic field. This is the stuff that connects our world. The best science of our time is now telling us that when we create emotions in our hearts, that those emotions actually regulate the electrical and the magnetic field throughout the rest of the body. The brain regulates the signals, but the brain can only do so when it receives the signal itself from the heart. Every day, we create a signal from our heart, and the quality of that signal from our heart to our brain regulates the way the rest of our body functions. So when we feel the feelings of well-being and peace, for example, that is one kind of signal, and it tells our brain that we live in a safe world, and our brain doesn't have to worry about fight or flight or defense. So our brain is able in that time to release the chemistry that supports life and a strong immune system and growth. When we feel a sense of fear and that we're threatened, the brain shuts down that part of our experience for a high immune system and high immune response, and it goes into what is called fight or flight with the chemistry, high levels of cortisol and adrenaline for the fight or flight. It's all about the way we feel in our hearts. Now, this is really interesting to me because when we study those ancient traditions, what we begin to understand is the reason this connection is not acknowledged in the modern world is because the very texts that tell us about the power of the human heart are the texts that were either edited or deleted from our most cherished traditions. And now that they're being rediscovered, we now know how this relationship works, and science is bearing it out. One of the first ways that scientists began to understand that the heart has a memory, and this is very interesting to me, was there was a successful heart transplant from a young child into the body of a woman who was in her 80s. The operation was successful. The woman woke up. The doctor said, "How do you feel?" She says, "I feel good, and I'm hungry." He says, "Okay, we'll get you some food." And she goes, "Well, I want not the hospital food." And she began to give very specific kinds of foods that she was craving as she was awakening from the anesthesia. She'd never eaten these foods before in her life, and a little investigation showed that the 13-year-old boy whose heart she had received, what she was craving were the foods that were his favorite foods. They said, okay, maybe it's a coincidence, anecdotally. This led to a series of studies, and they found that this happens actually very frequently, that when an organ is specifically a heart, transplanted into the body of a recipient, the recipient will begin to take on characteristics such as food cravings of the person that the heart originally, the heart originally resided in. This went so far, and this is why authorities now are so certain that this memory actually happens. There was a young woman who was murdered, and her heart was not injured in the murder, and it was transplanted into the body of another woman who immediately began having nightmares. The same nightmare, night after night, again and again, very detailed, very specific, very precise about the murder that had actually taken her life. The authorities began to take this seriously into consideration, and they researched the details, and the details were so specific they led to the arrest and the conviction of the person who committed the murder. And when we see that kind of information, it begins to take it out of the realm of anecdote and into the realm of telling us there's a phenomenon that's happening here that we haven't acknowledged in the past. There is a neural network, a brain within the heart. The brain has memory. It goes much more than that. The brain bypasses the logic of the mind. And in this way, it serves us because it can help us make decisions based on what we feel as truth rather than what we judge or discern even what our bias, our fear may prevent us from seeing when we think about the choices. Our heart doesn't see any of that because it makes its decisions based upon what it's feeling here, not what we're thinking from our past experience. So the term that now is being coined is called heart intelligence, and it's through this heart intelligence that we're beginning to open a new door of possibility about how this can serve us in our lives in the new world that's emerging, where we find ourselves interconnected with one another and with all life in ways that we're only beginning to understand.
You can sense, feel, remember, and process information that's independent from the brain.
We always think of the information input system as being entirely in the brain. But we're now discovering information that the heart receives information first and then relays it to the brain.
Studies have shown that the heart responds faster than the brain to outside stimulation.
One of the more recent studies we did in our labs was looking at what we ended up titling the electrophysiology of intuition. There was some previous research that had been done showing that the body would respond in a way that would predict a future event if the future event was emotionally significant and relevant to the person.
Participants were attached to sensors to record their brainwave activity, heart activity, and heart-brain interactions.
A person would be sitting in a computer, push a button, and then we're recording physiological data, and 6 to 8 seconds later, you would be shown a photograph. Okay, and then the photograph would be from two opposite ends of the spectrum of emotional arousal.
Participants were shown pictures of car accident victims, snakes attacking, and other disturbing images. On the other end of the spectrum, the pictures included flowers or sunsets. The photographs were randomly assigned for display to the participants.
What's key here is the computer assigned not only which photograph, but which type of photograph after the data was already recorded. So it was absolutely impossible for the research subject, the experimenter, to have any kind of foreknowledge of what photograph it might be. The computer itself didn't even know.
The results were surprising. The body responded even before the picture was displayed.
What we found was that not only did the body indeed respond prior to the event, seeing the picture in a way that would predict it, but it was the heart that responded first.
The heart's response was not only faster, but the signal it sent to the brain varied depending on the emotional content of the picture.
Looking at the signals that the heart was sending to the brain, that the heart literally sent a different message to the brain depending on what the future picture was going to be. Then you saw a brain response, then you saw the body response, which is where it then became conscious. So the flow of this intuitive information is heart, brain, body, and you have to have the body response for it to become consciously aware of it.
What these experiments reveal is changing our basic understanding of how the human body functions.
It appears as though the heart and brain later have access to a field of information not bound by time and space. If we're talking kind of quantum holographics or quantum physics, that's old news. So we're really starting to have ways now of showing that we really do have an energetic or an electronic system. And that's really primary, that it's really not bound by time and space.
Alhamdulillah, you have seen the two video, and what is important is for us to understand that these are the new sciences using quantum mechanics, and also the concept of quantum entanglement, and also the concept of unified field theory, and also the understanding of the nature of waves, Planck, and so on. So these are very scientific things in which, inshallah, we Muslims should participate in this research and give us a better understanding, because actually our brain is always in the past tense. What our thoughts that we have is always in the past tense. Why is in the past tense? Because, for example, in the experiment that they done before, it's a random. They can show either it's a terrible picture or a good picture. Before even the picture comes in, for a few milliseconds, your heart already has been signal this is going to be bad. How does the heart know? The picture was not shown yet, but when it is shown, then it manifests that feelings. That feelings comes first, then it affects the emotion which they can trace from the sensors they have put on the heart as well as on the brain, and then they understand when the thoughts patterns start appearing. So it is very, very fantastic. But this is what our great scholars have been telling us before. That's why the Quran always talk about the qalb, the inner self, and how we going to utilize this in a way of leading a very good life, and how we can reduce the evil or negative thoughts and so on. Those are the areas of research in which positive Islamic psychology framework will develop, and I'll explain to you how it works within the neural circuit, the hormonal system and so on, to the best of what I have done my research with, and inshallah we share to the world, and for us to understand that we have a basis, that this physical body is not the be all and end all of our existence. We have a heart, we have a qalb, and we have the qalb, we have the akal, we have the ruh, alright, these three SEM, and we have the jasad. So don't just think that this is the jasad only, because this jasad that we live in this earth is just temporary. But our heart, from the realm of the intuitive self, will live forever and ever and ever and ever. And we can choose to live forever and ever in closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is we call heaven or Jannah, or being deprived of the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we call hell or Jahannam. So all these things inshallah will strengthen our iman, and inshallah I will develop more and more of this understanding of positive Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, so that you can understand the difference between the current model of cognitive behavior therapy, where they have done thousands of research. It is effective but not complete, because the basis is just secularism, materialism. But positive Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, we talk about the intuitive heart and beyond, and how we all can participate in leading a good life to achieve iman, to achieve peace, happiness and success for ourselves, our family, all humanity and the universe, inshallah.